By morning, I was running on caffeine and dread. Sleep had abandoned me, leaving only questions circling like vultures. I couldn't face another day pretending nothing was wrong. So I did what my pride once swore I'd never do. I called for help. More photos followed. Inside the restaurant, sharing wine, her hand brushing his cheek, his eyes lit with the same tenderness I hadn't seen in years. It felt like watching strangers inhabit the ruins of my life. A video came next. Laughter, whispers, a hand lingering too long. Every second stabbed deeper than the last. That night, the house felt hollow, like a museum of memories that no longer belonged to me. The old clock on the wall ticked with cruel precision, each second accusing me of ignoring the truth for too long. When Victor came home, his tie hung loose, his eyes ringed with fatigue, and his smile too practiced to be real. I greeted him softly, but inside, suspicion coiled tighter than a spring. The scent of an unfamiliar perfume drifted through the room, a sweet, floral note, shameless and taunting. My heart pounded as I opened it. Just one sentence. "You were incredible tonight, Dad." My fingers went cold. "Dad?" I whispered, the word echoing like a gunshot in an empty room. The screen blurred as tears welled up, but curiosity drove me on. No sender name, only a jumbled address of numbers and letters. I scrolled for context. Nothing. He had deleted everything else. By sunrise, the stage was set, and fate would pull the curtain in front of the whole street. What happened next sent our neighbours scrambling for their phones and the fire brigade, sirens slicing the morning quiet. If you're hearing my voice, hit like and subscribe so more people find these true life reckonings. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to see how far this story travels. I slid into my husband, Victor Marquez's car, and felt my stomach drop. A tube of personal lubricant winked at me from the glove box. That was the moment something inside me hardened. I swapped it with industrial superglue and closed the lid like a judge dropping a gavel. I said nothing. I simply drove home with the windows down, letting the night air cool the wildfire in my chest. I sat down at the counter, unable to breathe. The hum of the refrigerator and the faint clatter of metal trays were the only sounds grounding me to reality. My fingers trembled as I saved every file, labeling them carefully on my flash drive. Proof. Not of infidelity alone, but of betrayal that tore through generations. When I opened the message, my world split in two. There was Victor, my husband of 40 years, stepping out of a restaurant, his hand intertwined with another woman's. The woman was young, beautiful, confident. But it wasn't just anyone. It was Alison, my daughter-in-law. My knees nearly gave out. I zoomed in, praying I was wrong. Her face was unmistakable, framed by loose waves and painted lips. They weren't father-in-law and daughter-in-law. They were lovers. The next morning, I opened the bakery early, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Every customer's smile felt like a mockery, every sound too loud. The photos haunted me. I saw them even when I closed my eyes. By noon, my phone buzzed again. It was Thomas. "Mrs. Marquez, I have more evidence," he said. His voice carried the careful tone of a man who knew he was about to break someone's heart again. He sent a video and a message. They met again this afternoon. Same woman, same pattern. The air grew heavy, the clock ticking louder, as if mocking my confusion. I searched his jacket pockets next, my movements mechanical, my breath shallow. A crisp receipt fell into my lap, from a steakhouse in San Antonio dated that same night. San Antonio. He'd told me he was in Dallas. My pulse spiked. 2 dinners, 1 lie, and a wine bottle labelled with the same vintage he once gave me for our 10th anniversary. My hands shook as I took a photo of the receipt. 40 years of marriage whispered through my mind, like an old song that suddenly sounded false. I knew then this was not exhaustion in his eyes. It was guilt wearing a human face. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Mrs. Marquez. I was referred by Mrs. Miller. Let's meet at noon. Cafe Azura. His tone was professional, but something about it steadied me. At least someone was willing to look into the shadows I couldn't face alone. Cafe Azura was small, tucked between old bookstores downtown. The scent of roasted coffee filled the air as I walked in, clutching a flash drive of photos and screenshots in my trembling hand. Thomas looked ordinary. Mid-40s, stocky build, grey shirt, kind eyes that hid a private intelligence. I paused the video, staring at the still frame until my chest hurt. I'd seen that look before, decades ago, when Victor used to look at me that way. I walked into the bedroom, watching him sleep, snoring softly, his face calm and almost kind. That calmness mocked me. I whispered, "Who are you now, Victor?" My voice broke in the dark, answered only by the steady rhythm of his breathing. Somewhere deep inside, a new emotion was forming, not just sorrow or fury, but a sharp, cold hunger for truth. Back inside, the house looked the same, but it no longer felt like home. I checked his phone again, praying for some innocent explanation. There was none. Empty messages, clean inbox, deleted calls. It was too perfect, too sterile. My chest tightened as I realized I was living beside a man who had rehearsed deceit as an art form. I poured myself a glass of water, but it tasted like dust. Every corner of our life now seemed poisoned by doubt. The call came that night while I was closing the bakery, the smell of sugar and flour still clinging to my apron. My hands were dusted white, trembling slightly as I wiped them on a towel and checked my phone. It was Thomas. "Mrs. Marquez." His voice was low, cautious. "I have something you should see." My heart skipped. "Tell me," I whispered, but he didn't. "I'd rather you see it for yourself," he said. "I've sent photos." I locked myself in the office and pressed play. The video showed Victor and Allison on a hotel balcony, sunlight wrapping them in a warm lie. She leaned her head on his shoulder. He kissed her temple. For a moment, they looked peaceful, like lovers who thought no one could see. Mrs. Miller's number was still buried in my phone from years ago, a friend from my bakery's early days. Her voice was soft but cautious when she answered. "Elena? It's been so long. What's wrong, dear?" I hesitated, shame catching in my throat. "I need the contact of that investigator you once mentioned," I whispered. There was a silence heavy enough to feel through the line. Then, with quiet understanding, she said, "I'll send you Thomas's number. He's discreet. He'll find the truth, whatever it is." I no longer looked at Victor with heartbreak. I looked at him the way a scientist studies poison, carefully, curiously, knowing exactly what it can do. He would never see it coming. Not yet. I copied the audio to my flash drive, then to a hard drive, then to the cloud. I typed a transcript, my fingers steadying as the words appeared in black and white. "Get those papers signed. Belongs to us. She trusts me." The chorus of betrayal became a blueprint for my defense. That night, I didn't cry. The tears had dried into something sharper. Clarity. I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by evidence, printed photos, receipts, the flash drive, and my trembling notebook. Every piece told a story of deceit that had rewritten my life without my consent. 40 years of marriage, reduced to file names and time-stamped lies. The ache in my chest was no longer sorrow. It was purpose. Still, I couldn't stop. I searched the car more carefully this time, beneath the seats, inside the glove compartment, under floor mats. Crumpled napkins carried the same floral scent, brazen and alien. I took photos of everything, hands trembling as though documenting a crime scene. I thought about the man I had once loved for his honesty, his laughter, the way he'd surprise me with fresh roses on Fridays. That man had vanished, replaced by a stranger who lied about dinners and cities. "I understand this isn't easy," he said, reviewing the photos in silence. I nodded. "I just need the truth," I murmured, "even if it hurts." He slipped the flash drive into his laptop bag, closed his notebook, and gave a single firm nod. "I'll find out everything. Go home, Mrs. Marquez. Try to rest." For the first time in weeks, I felt the faintest flicker of relief. Fragile, but real. Maybe the truth would finally set me free, even if it shattered everything else. "Allison," Victor said, calm and practiced. "Once the transfer is notarized, the bakery's chain belongs to us." She laughed softly, the sound bright and cold. "Good. I'm tired of waiting. Get those papers signed. We'll say she's overwhelmed and wants to retire." The words struck like a blow. I paused, rewound, listened again, fighting the urge to throw the device against the wall. Thomas's text came again. "They rented the room for the day. It's not the first time." My throat tightened. The walls of the bakery, once my sanctuary, now felt like a cage. I saved the files to my hard drive, naming them with the precision of someone cataloguing grief. There was no denying it anymore. The betrayal wasn't a dream. It was a life I had to wake up from. Next, I checked the recording device I'd planted behind the bookshelf. The red light blinked patiently, like a heartbeat waiting for its moment. I tested the connection to my phone. Clear, strong, loyal. I tucked it back into its hiding place, covering it with a framed photo from Daniel and Allison's wedding. I studied her smiling face, the same smile she wore when lying. My hand trembled, but not from fear. It was from restraint. The night air in the garage felt colder than usual, thick with the scent of gasoline and something sweeter. Perfume. Faint, but unmistakable. I turned on my phone's flashlight and scanned Victor's SUV like a detective searching for ghosts. Under the passenger seat, I found a small plastic tube. When I lifted it, the light caught the dried residue on the cap. It wasn't just any tube. It was the same lubricant I had seen before, the one that haunted my thoughts. My heart clenched, but I placed it back exactly where I found it. The betrayal was already etched deep enough. I didn't need to touch it again to feel the sting. I began cataloging everything, labeling each image, cross-referencing dates and phone records. It wasn't madness. It was method. If Victor thought he could humiliate me in silence, he had underestimated the woman who built a business from nothing and raised a family from the ground up. I wasn't powerless. I was patient. I began preparing the set pieces. First, I gathered the industrial glue from the bakery's supply closet and poured it into a discreet plastic bottle. I cleaned the exterior until it looked innocent, ordinary. Then I found the old lubricant tube in the glove compartment of his SUV, the same one I'd discovered weeks ago. I emptied and refilled it with precision, drop by drop, until it was ready for its starring role. It clung to his jacket when he threw it on the chair, a confession without words. He mumbled about a late business dinner, then collapsed onto the bed without showering, snoring within minutes. I sat in the living room, staring at his phone that still glowed faintly on the sofa. Victor never used email. He always said, "Technology's for kids, not for old souls like me." But there it was, an unread message pulsing with quiet menace. Days blurred into nights as I compiled a hidden archive. Screenshots, printed emails, voice recordings. I stored duplicates in cloud folders and a USB drive hidden behind the bakery's old recipe books. I spoke to no one, not even Thomas. Every smile I gave at the counter, every laugh with a customer, was a mask. Inside, I was already planning. By morning, I had memorized every word of their conspiracy. I brewed coffee the way Victor liked it, 2 spoons of sugar, 1 of guilt, and waited for him to descend the stairs. He kissed my forehead absently, already rehearsing the next lie. "Big day?" he muttered, adjusting his cufflinks. I smiled, as if nothing had changed. That was the first move. Make him believe I was still asleep inside the lie he built. Thomas called after closing time, his voice low as if the night itself might overhear. He said he had captured audio in a parking lot, Victor and Allison speaking freely, careless in the dark. I took the file home, locked the door, and pressed play with trembling fingers. The recorder hissed, and then their voices rose from the static like ghosts stepping into my kitchen. I told Mrs. Peterson I was leaving for Nashville and packed a small suitcase, the lie sliding over my shoulders like an old coat. Before I left, I checked the stove, oil in the pan, the igniter string threaded and attached to a weighted coffee can on the window latch. My hands moved with the calm of someone who had rehearsed every step. They mapped out my ruin like accountants balancing a ledger. They named a notary contact who owed Victor favors. They talked about fake consulting fees, a silent partner, and a temporary management agreement that would move the stores into a shell company before I could blink. "She trusts me," Victor added, almost tender. "I'll handle the signatures." The tenderness in his voice felt like poison sweetened with honey. Daniel leapt from the cab, struck the front door with a sledge, and the hose team streamed inside. Through the thin glass, I heard the raw sound that had haunted me. 2 bodies stuck, crying out, bound by hardened glue. Firefighters moved with practiced efficiency, but nothing could hide the spectacle. They carried them out wrapped in sheets, faces raw and mortified. The crowd pressed forward, murmurs rising into cries, and someone began recording. The scene moved onto phones and feeds. Daniel stood at the threshold, soot smudging his brow. His eyes met mine briefly, and then he turned away. I tapped the tiny remote. The igniter clicked, and a small flame kissed the oil. Black, oily smoke rolled up and out the window in thick, guilty ribbons, curling into the morning air. Mrs. Peterson gasped. Phones were out and calls made. Sirens came soon after. The neighborhood stirred like a sleeping body jolted awake. I drafted a new plan, a tighter one. Tomorrow, I would tell Victor I had to travel out of town for a bakery contract. I would pack a suitcase, kiss his cheek, and pretend to leave. In truth, I'd cross the street to Mrs. Peterson's house with a thermos of coffee and a lie ready in my mouth. From there, I could see everything. The driveway, the kitchen window, and the front door he would open for his mistress. That night, I lay beside him in bed, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. I counted each inhale like the ticks of a clock winding toward midnight. He dreamed, perhaps of money, perhaps of her. I dreamed of smoke and silence and the sound of sirens. My revenge wasn't born of rage anymore. It was born of symmetry. He had built his empire on deceit. I would dismantle it with truth. When dawn crept through the curtains, I rose before him and made breakfast. He smiled groggily, unaware that each movement, the buttered toast, the folded napkin, the coffee cup, was part of a countdown. He told me he'd be busy all day, and I nodded, whispering, "So will I." I waited on Mrs. Peterson's steps until the ambulance siren faded. Videos spread fast, neighbors whispering. At the hospital, the doctor said the burns were treatable, but the humiliation would linger. In a quiet moment, I swapped the ointment tubes as if in a small, careful ritual. Daniel handed me the folder I had prepared: photos, video stills, transcripts. He read, jaw working, and then folded the pages with hands steadier than I felt. I set the documents on the chair between us and said, 40 years end here. He nodded and walked away. Inside, the house smelled of smoke and something stranger: burnt oil, panic, and shame. A sheet had been pulled across the bed, but it could not hide the tangled figures beneath. Daniel froze as his flashlight landed on them. His father and his wife, glued together, their faces contorted in pain and disbelief. The air seemed to collapse around him. One of the younger firefighters murmured, "Oh God," and stepped back. Daniel's throat tightened until the words came out like gravel. "Get them unstuck, carefully. Don't look." But the looks had already begun. When the ambulance doors closed, the crowd slowly dispersed, their gossip already rippling through the neighborhood like a fever. Daniel remained a moment longer by the curb, staring at the empty space where the fire truck had been. He looked up at the house, its windows blackened by smoke, its secrets dragged into daylight. And then he saw his mother standing still under the porch light. Their eyes met, a single fragile thread between devastation and understanding. He didn't speak, and she didn't move. In that silent exchange, both knew that something inside their family had burned beyond repair. Later, as night fell and the street quieted, the smell of smoke lingered. Neighbors would tell the story for years: how the chief's own family scandal had unfolded under flashing red lights, how a quiet house had erupted into tragedy and spectacle. Elena returned inside Mrs. Peterson's kitchen, sat by the window, and finally allowed herself to cry, not for them, but for the part of her that had died long before the fire. I sat on Mrs. Peterson's porch with a thermos of coffee, pretending to read. From my vantage, I could see the kitchen window and the driveway, the whole scene laid out in humble suburban detail. Time stretched thin. At 10, a taxi pulled up. Allison stepped out in a floral dress and oversized sunglasses, perfume trailing behind her. Victor opened the door and escorted her inside with that practiced courtesy. I pressed play on my earbud and listened as they moved through the house, laughed and whispered, intimate, careless. Outside, the crowd pressed closer, their voices rising in waves, questions, gasps, then the sharp crack of laughter as realization spread. Phones were lifted, screens gleamed blue in the smoke. "Is that Julian?" someone whispered. "And her?" another added, unable to even speak Allison's name. The scene turned viral before the ambulance arrived. The two were carried out beneath thin white sheets, their faces pale, their shame radiant. Daniel followed behind, silent, the muscles in his jaw twitching as he stared at the ground. His own men averted their eyes, unsure whether to salute or apologize. The days after the hospital incident passed like the slow unwinding of a storm. The bakery that had once echoed with the chatter of customers now smelled of sugar and silence. Elena opened early each morning, her hands moving by instinct, kneading, shaping, baking. The rhythm of dough and flour became her prayer, her penance, her promise that life, no matter how scarred, would continue to rise. The fire truck screeched to a halt, its red lights strobing across the quiet suburban street like a pulse of judgment. Neighbors poured from their porches in robes and slippers, drawn by the smoke that still curled from the kitchen window. Daniel jumped from the truck, his boots hitting the pavement hard, commanding his crew with the crisp certainty of training. "Move fast! Possible occupants inside!" he barked. No one yet understood what horror waited behind that broken door. Victor's voice cracked. Elena, please, not in front of Daniel. She met his eyes for the first time, and the glimmer of pity vanished. Daniel already knows, she said. He saw everything. You did that, not me. Silence followed, deep, suffocating. For the first time, even the machines seemed to stop breathing. Moments later, the door opened. Daniel entered in his fire chief uniform, a folder in his hand. The divorce papers she'd prepared months ago but never signed. His face was expressionless, but his eyes were red. Without a word, he handed the folder to his mother. Elena opened it, signed her name with one clean stroke, then slid the pen toward Victor. Your turn. Victor hesitated. Please, don't do this. Elena's voice broke slightly, but her resolve did not. It's already done. She turned to Allison, who had buried her face in her hands. And you'll sign the annulment. Daniel deserves peace, not lies. Daniel didn't move. He just watched as Allison's trembling hand reached for the pen. When it was over, Elena gathered the papers, tucked them neatly into the folder, and looked at both of them one last time. You'll heal, she said, but not from this. Then she walked out, her steps slow, deliberate, echoing down the sterile hall. Behind her came a sharp scream, Allison's voice, high and frantic. The mustard had found the burns. Nurses rushed past her, shouting orders. Elena didn't look back. Inside the room, Allison stared at the ceiling, tears crusting at the corners of her eyes. She didn't look up when Elena entered. Victor tried to speak first, his voice rasping, heavy with the weight of guilt. Elena, please, I can explain. She cut him off with a raised hand. Explain what, Victor? How you betrayed your wife and your son in the same breath. Her tone was sharp, but not loud, the quiet kind of fury that makes men crumble. Allison began to sob. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... You meant every word, Elena said, stepping closer. And now you'll live with it. She set the tubes gently on the table between their beds. The nurse said to use this for the burns, she murmured, almost kindly. Then she placed a thick folder on the bedside tray, the photos, the recordings, the contracts they had forged to steal her bakery. Victor's hand trembled as he opened it. The air grew heavy. He flipped through each page like a man paging through his own obituary. You took 40 years of my life, Elena said softly, and you used it to destroy what we built together. But here's the part you never understood, Victor. I built it without you once, and I can do it again. Allison reached for her arm, sobbing harder, but Eleanor stepped back, her face unreadable. Don't touch me, she whispered. You don't deserve to say my name. Some stories end with fury, others with peace. Mine found both. The fire that once destroyed me became the light that showed me who I really was. If you've listened this far, thank you for walking with me through every shadow and every spark. Elena's bakery began to flourish again, not from pity, but from something purer. People came for the pastries, but stayed for the warmth she gave them. The same hands that had once built traps now folded croissants, braided loaves, and handed cookies to children who giggled at the sugar on their lips. There was no trace of anger in her voice anymore, only patience and a quiet dignity that came from surviving fire, both real and metaphorical. One morning, Daniel brought in a new sign he'd carved himself. Marquez and Son Bakery. The wood smelled fresh, the letters painted in gold. Elena looked at it for a long time before speaking. You didn't have to add my name, she said. Daniel smiled faintly. It was yours before it was anyone else's. Together they mounted it above the door. When the morning sun hit it, the gold letters glowed like forgiveness itself. The days that followed were a weave of hard labor and harder silences. The bakery was busier. People came with casseroles, compliments, and gossip. Some called me brave. Others said I had stooped too low. I did not argue. I secured what I could: contracts, recipes, bank signatures, and taught Daniel the emergency codes. He moved in for a while, keeping the oven warm and the books tidy. At night, I would sit by the shop window after closing, watching the streetlights smear the pavement gold. I felt the ache of what I had lost, and a brittle satisfaction that the truth was out. I kept baking and closing the ledger each day with a small, stubborn piece. The bakery remained, and the work continued. The scandal spread quickly at first, then dulled to a whisper. Videos were deleted, articles taken down, neighbours moved on to new gossip. Victor and Alison had left town after the divorce finalised. Word was they sold their house and tried to start over somewhere far away, but neither Elena nor Daniel cared to ask where. They had learned that revenge has an echo, and silence was its only cure. Maybe you've faced your own betrayals, your own nights that felt endless. I hope my story reminds you that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just keeps baking bread when the world falls apart. Sometimes, when the day ended and the shop emptied, Eleanor would sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching Daniel clean the counters. She saw her late husband's shadow in him, the same steadiness, but without the cruelty. "You look like your father," she told him once. He paused, meeting her eyes. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm not." They both smiled, and the weight in the room softened. At night, when the city quieted and the ovens cooled, Elena would write in her ledger, the same one she'd used for years, recording numbers, notes, and names. On the last page, she wrote only one line. Some fires burn to destroy, others to reveal what was worth saving. Then she closed it gently, turned off the light, and stepped into the calm of her rebuilt life. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing how far our stories travel. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps me bring more true stories of love, pain, and redemption to life. Until next time, with love and respect, always. Elena watched from Mrs. Peterson's porch, her hands gripping the railing until her knuckles went white. Every shout, every flash, felt like the echo of her own heartbeat. She had imagined revenge. She had not imagined the sound it would make. Across the lawn, a child asked his mother why everyone was crying and laughing at the same time. The woman pulled him close and whispered, "Don't look." The hospital smelled of antiseptic and wilted flowers, a place where shame had nowhere to hide. The hallway was bright but cold, the fluorescent lights humming above the steady shuffle of shoes. Elena stood by the nurse's desk, her composure carved from sheer will. Through the glass partition, she could see Victor and Alison lying in separate beds, pale, bandaged, motionless. The doctor, weary from whispers and headlines, spoke softly. "They're stable, Mrs. Marquez. Minor burns, but they'll both recover." He hesitated before adding, "The other matter will take longer." Elena nodded without looking up. On the counter lay 2 identical tubes of ointment marked for skin repair. She thanked the nurse, her voice calm, almost tender, and as soon as the woman turned away, Elena reached into her purse and swapped the labels for the 2 tubes of thick yellow mustard she'd prepared earlier. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was not. When she looked up again, her reflection in the glass showed a stranger, not the baker, not the wife, but a woman forged in fire and betrayal. The house became a stage, and I played my part to perfection. I laughed at his empty jokes, packed his lunch, and even reminded him not to forget his meeting in Dallas. He didn't notice the faint red mark on my wrist where I'd pressed the flash drive too tightly the night before. When he left, I stood by the window, watching his car vanish down the street, the reflection of my own eyes staring back at me, tired, calculating, awake. Outside, Daniel waited by the window, his reflection ghosted against the night. She joined him, placing the folder in his hands. "It's done," she said quietly. He nodded, eyes hollow. "Why did it have to be him, Mom?" She touched his face gently. "Because monsters don't hide under beds," she whispered. "Sometimes they sleep beside you." They stood in silence until the noise from the hospital room faded into the background hum of distant monitors. For the first time in months, Eleanor exhaled. The air smelled clean again, cold, antiseptic, and free. Daniel returned to work sooner than anyone expected. His crew avoided eye contact at first, but their respect grew quietly in the weeks that followed. He repaired what he could: hoses, engines, and the cracked shell of his own heart. In the evenings, he came by the bakery to help close up, his hands rough from work, but steady. They didn't talk much about that day. Some wounds, Elena knew, were better healed in silence.